Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, today we will talk about lecture number 12, which is regarding different species terminologies. The outlines of today's lecture are what are different species terminologies, like monotypic species, what is polytypic species, what is cryptic species, eco-species, insular species, sympatric species, allopatric species, sibling species, superspecies, and subspecies, and there are many more, and with examples. The lecture outcome. After watching and listening this lecture, students will be able to know about different species terminologies and their definitions, and students will also know about speciation. So the first one, which is genetical, biological, or biospecies. So it is a genetical species or biospecies or biological species can be defined as it's a group of actually or potentially interbreeding natural population. So this is one point or one aspect. The second is that are reproductively isolated from other such groups. So there are two aspects of this definition. Number one, actually or potentially interbreeding, and reproductively isolated from other such groups. Any species as a biospecies. Let's suppose take an example of dogs, Canis familiaris, cats, uh, Phallus domesticus, and goats, Capra hericus. So, for example, if a group of dogs living in a cohort and another group of dogs that is living in Lucky Marot. Now, the group of dogs that is living in cohort, they are actually interbreeding with each other and producing fertile offspring. So that's a species. But their other group is living in Lucky Marwat. So they cannot interbreed with each other because they are very, very far away from each other. So they are not actually interbreeding, but they have the potential. So the second point, the potentiality mean they have the potential to interbreed if the Lucky Marwat dog and the cohort dog, they have a chance to meet. So they can interbreed. So number one aspect is they can actually interbreed, or they have the potential to interbreed natural populations, and the second, they are reproductively isolated from other such group. So now the another aspect is there is like dog population, there is cat population, there is goat population. Now, the dogs cannot interbreed with cats, cats cannot interbreed with dogs, cats cannot interbreed with goats, goats cannot interbreed with cats, these goats cannot interbreed, Capra hericus cannot interbreed with Canis familiaris because they are different. And that's why we call them different species, because number one, they actually or potentially interbreed with each other, and they are isolated from other groups. They cannot interbreed with other groups in the same like vicinity or in the same ecology, the same ecosystem. They cannot interbreed. They are separately isolated from other such groups. Like cats are isolated from dogs, dogs are isolated from cats, and the same way with goats. So this is biological or biospecies. Another is a monotypic species. So it's very clear from its name, mono mean one, and typic mean type. So all those species which do not have subspecies are called monotypic species. So all those species which do not have subspecies are known as monotypic species, or you can say that those genera or the genus which include only single species but do not include any subspecies are known as monotypic species. Like for example, vampire squid. So Vampyrothetes and Farnellus is an example of monotypic species. So this Vampyrothetes is the genus, and it has only one species, the Farnellus. So there is no subspecies. That's why vampire squid is monotypic subspecies. Monotypic species. Sorry. And this is vampire squid, and this is another picture of vampire squid. So this is a vampire squid. That's what it look like. Then polytypic species. So, as the name indicates, poly mean many and typic mean types. So, all those species which have subspecies mean they have two or more than two subspecies are called polytypic species. Let's take an example. For example, tiger. Tiger, the scientific name of the tiger is Panthera tigris. So, Panthera is actually a genus, and tigris is a species in this genus. But there are many subspecies. So, for example, the Indian tiger is known as Panthera tigris. The Chinese tiger is known as Panthera tiger amiensis. The Siberian tiger is known as Panthera tigris altetia or altica, and the German tiger is known as Panthera tiger sondica. So these are different subspecies of this tiger, Panthera tigris. So this is Panthera tigris, or tiger is polytypic species because it contains subspecies. Then there is another thing, the ecospecies. So ecospecies is again very simple, a group of population that are able to exchange gene freely without loss of fertility. For example, there are a group of population which are interbreeding with each other. They are exchanging the gene freely, but without loss of fertility, mean they are producing fertile offspring. Then there is a phylotropic species. So phylotropic species, any species that have the tendency to extend its range of distribution. Now, species they originate once at a certain point on the earth, on the biosphere, but then they reproduce and then they increase their number, and the population pressure increases, and then if these animals have proper locomotive organs, if they have well, and if they have ways to distribute, then they start extending their range. They move out from their original birthplace or original place, and they distribute throughout the world. So now, not all organisms have this tendency. So those organisms which have the tendency to extend its range are known as phylotropic species. And the opposite is Philopatric species, those species which do not show any tendency to extend its range of distribution. Now, this tendency lacking is maybe because of their weak locomotor organs, their weak physiological system, or maybe there are barriers. So there are many reasons, but those species which have the tendency to extend its range of distribution are known as phylotropic species, and those which do not show tendency to extend its range are known as philopatric species. So, like phylotropic species, those species which have the tendency to extend its range will be distributed throughout the world or many biotic regions. Like, for example, cockroaches, they are present everywhere. Mice, rats are present everywhere. On the other hand, certain species they are restricted to certain areas. Like kangaroo, it is restricted to Australia only. Another is a continental species. So it's very clear all those animals or those species which are found on large land masses are known as continental species, and the opposite of this is insular species. Insular, those species which are living on small isolated islands are known as insular species. So those which are living on vast land masses, and those which are restricted to isolated small islands. Then cosmopolitan species. Now, all those species which are found throughout the world in major geographical region or major geographic communities, ecological communities, are known as cosmopolitan species. And the opposite of cosmopolitan species is endemic species. So those species which are restricted or confined to a particular or a peculiar or only one particular area, and they are not present anywhere else in the world, are known as endemic species. So like the cosmopolitan species, the mice, the rats, the snail, the earthworms, hawks, cuckoos, they are birds, they are present everywhere in the birds. But on the other hand, endemic species, if you look at the endemic, for example, now giraffe are present only in Africa. Rhinoceros are also restricted to India and Africa. You can see that the kangaroo is restricted to Australia, kiwi is restricted to New Zealand. So these are endemic. Exotic species. So species which belong to different geographical area, but they are growing and thriving in a new area. For example, if a species is introduced from the actual place which it belong, for example, if they are endemic to certain place, but you transport those species, or by chance they have been transported to a new area and where they start thriving and growing, so these species are now called exotic species. Like for example, in Pakistan we have the silver carp in Pakistan is exotic species. So in Pakistan we have exotic species, the silver carp. So the silver carp, the Hypothalmictis monotypics, it is exotic in Pakistan. So the Chinese carp, the Hypothalmictis monotypics, it is exotic in Pakistan because it is actually from China. They have been introduced in Pakistan. In Pakistan, it is thriving and growing. Invasive species. So it's very related to the exotic species. When exotic species, when they start affecting the local fauna, the growth, or whatever it is, on whatever base it is, but if it start affecting the local fauna and flora, so it become invasive species. So the exotic species will become invasive species if it start affecting the local fauna and flora by destroying it or by competing with it. Another species is incipient species, or sometimes it is also known as semi-species. So look, in speciation we have different stages. For example, a species, it becomes geographically isolated, and then changes start accumulating in them, and with the passage of time they become different and different and different and different and different, and the last stage they become very different. It now become an isolated species. So this incipient species is one of the stage in between. Like it is a group of particular species that are about to be genetically isolated. Mean about to. They are not now isolated, but they have accumulated certain changes that in a very few years or in a very little time they will become isolated from the main population, but still at this time they are they can interbreed with each other, but very soon they will become genetically isolated from the rest of the species because of the geographical barrier between them. So though at this time they can still reproduce with other groups of the species before their gene pool become too distinct. So at this point their gene pool is not too much distinct that they cannot reproduce, but soon they will become genetically isolated because of the geographical isolation. So such species are known as incipient species. Then there are cryptic species. So a species which cannot be described or differentiated from other related species. Mean species, sometimes species are morphologically very similar, but they are reproductively isolated, or genetically they are very different from each other. So that's why we cannot distinguish them easily, and such species are known as cryptic species. Or you can say those species which distinctive features are not clear. Like if you look at the animals, they appear identical, but they are genetically quite different. So by looking into them, you will say that they are similar species or same species, but when you study their genetic makeup, they will be very different from each other. So such species are very difficult to differentiate, and such species are known as cryptic species. A little bit explanation. So the species which are alike on the basis of observed features, mean when you observe them they are alike, but when you genetically or when you look at them or you observe them sexually, they are different, mean they are sexually isolated from each other, they cannot interbreed. So one of the definition of the species is that they will sexually interbreed, but they cannot, they are morphologically similar but they cannot interbreed. So such species are like cryptic species. So there is a confusion between the term sibling species and cryptic species a little bit. Like the cryptic species are incapable of interbreeding, but the sibling species can interbreed and are not capable of producing fertile hybrids. So sibling species, they cannot produce fertile hybrids, but these cryptic species, they can interbreed, uh, are incapable of interbreeding, but the sibling species can interbreed. So like in the case of the cryptic species, they cannot, they're totally different from each other, they cannot interbreed. They are morphologically similar, but they cannot interbreed. But in sibling species, they can interbreed, but the hybrids will not be fertile. Then let's talk about speciation. So what is speciation? So speciation is how new kind of plants or animals species created. Speciation occur when a group within a species separate from other members of its species and develops its own unique characteristics. How it happens? From the main population, a small amount, a small group of the species, they will become isolated geographically, and when they separate from the main group, so the needs are in the new area, the needs will be different, the ecology will be different. So because of that, their own characteristics start differentiating or develop and differentiate from the old one, and then they, with the passage of time, they become new species. So this is how new species of plants or animal arise. Like the demands of the different population of the demand of the different environment, or the characteristics of the members of the new group will differentiate the new species from the ancestor, because the needs of the new environment are different from the older one. For example, this is the parent population, and then a small number from this population, they become isolated. So now they are geographically isolated, they cannot meet with each other, they are very far away from each other. So this new environment have new challenges, and that is very different from the old one. So they have to compete, they have to adjust, adopt themselves with this new environment, and by doing so, different characteristics will accumulate in them, and with the passage of time, these characteristics will accumulate in all of them, and it will be passed from their parents to offspring, and a time will come that this population will become so distinct that then you can name them a new species. So from old, new species will arise because of this isolation, because when they isolate, the gene cannot be like exchanged between them, because they are very far away from each other, they are geographically isolated. Like for example, if you look at the example of the Galapagos finches, or in other words, Darwin finches. So all these birds, they had a common ancestor from South American mainland. So this was the ancestor. This was the ancestor finch with this normal beak from South American mainland. But then, because of their introduction into different environments, what happened? Different types of finches, they arose from this common ancestor. Now, ground finches, tree finches, warbler finches, and then again these warbler finches, they developed into different structure like beaks. Some of them are like modified beaks. They have modified beaks for seed eatings. Some have like flesh eating, for grubs eating. Some are for like insect eaters, some are bud eaters, some are flower eaters. So according to the need of the environment in which they were introduced, their beak modified or adopted according to that environment, and by adopting, they become differentiated into different species. So you can see from the parent population, from the common population, so many different types of species of these finches, they arose. An example, like this, we discussed the Galapagos finches. So if you want, I will explain again it. Like different species of these birds live on different islands in Galapagos archipelago, located in the Pacific Ocean of South America. So these finches, they isolated from one another by the ocean, and over millions of years, each species of finch develop a unique beak that is specially adapted to the kind of food or according to its environment. So some finches have large, blunt beak that can crack the hard shells of nuts and seeds. So finches with beaks for cracking nuts and seeds. Other finches have long thin to probe into cactus flower without the bird being poked by the cactus spines. So, like for the sucking of the nectar. Still, other finches have medium-sized beak that is for grasping of insects, and because they are isolated, the bird do not interbreed. So now, because they were isolated by very long distances, they were not able to interbreed, and with the passage of time, every bird, they developed into a unique species with unique characteristics. Thank you so much for watching. See you in another part of this lecture.